Good American Family. Mark Duplass on Michael's meltdown and victimhood as Natalia Grace truth comes through. Natalia Grace, Imogen Faith Reed, finally gets her day in court against the Barnetts in the finale of Good American Family, but it does not go anywhere near to plan. The attorneys for Christine, Ellen Pompeo, and Michael, Mark Duplass, successfully avoid having Natalia's age relitigated at trial thanks to a past procedural error on the part of the state. So despite the prosecution boasting a slew of witnesses who are ready and willing to attest to Natalia's childhood, and the fact that the Barnetts knew of it when they abandoned and abused her, no one is allowed to speak to it. Michael is found not guilty, and the legal system has once again failed Natalia Grace. Before his exoneration, Michael does have a moment of reckoning in which he seems to realize what he's done. Though Christine talks him down from it, there's a moment when he finally starts to understand that he's been an active participant in harming a child with disabilities who he was supposed to protect, and he immediately begins to experience a panic attack. In the end, though, when confronted face-to-face by Natalia, he resorts to victimhood and blame gaming once again. Throughout the second half of Good American Family, Michael is given several chances to make things right with Natalia and declines to do so every time. The finale is no exception. So why is it that he's still so under Christine's control? And what was it like to portray a character who's constantly avoiding the truth about his own life and actions? TV Insider caught up with Mark Duplass to lift the veil of a bit more on Michael's perspective throughout the events of Good American Family. Yeah, I was a good target for this show because I had read headlines but not in-depth articles. I had not seen the documentary. I had probably made some biased snap judgments about what was going on without doing any in-depth reading, so I was right in the sweet spot. And when Katie Robbins and Sarah Sutherland, co-creators, approached me about this, I was a little skeptical because I just don't know how I feel about ripped from the headlines things. And they said, no, this is something we want to do. I know there's a doc out there. I know that we've seen this play out in the media, but we feel like people have made a lot of snap judgments here, and we would like to sort of implicate the audience and take them along the road in which the media took them along, and then shift them halfway through the show in this multi-perspective approach. And I found that to be really bold and interesting for a very expensive, high-profile miniseries starring ABC and Hulu's Golden Goddess, Ellen Pompeo, that they would let them do this kind of thing. So that got me interested. So I did a little bit more research on the story and realized how complex it would be. And I think the thing that ultimately hooked me was just the character of Michael. I watched a little bit of the documentary, not enough to judge, just enough to get a sense of his rhythms and whatnot, because he is a public figure, and you have to know what you're playing, even though it's really just kind of a character inspired by. And when I saw this sort of roadmap for me of someone who's dealt with lifelong mental health issues, someone who's got some childhood trauma, someone who has a savior complex because they feel like they barely survived, and they see someone else suffering, they have to go and try and help them and save them so they don't have to look inward. All of those things felt like, I can see this. I definitely have a lot of experience with mental health, and so that was an easy roadmap for me. And I just wanted to do my best to portray somebody who has highly questionable motivations and behavior in a way that didn't have any judgment to it. The only thing I tried to carry forward was just a sense of a little bit of hyperbole and histrionics in the mannerisms, which for me are indicative of someone living in a place of fear and a sense that no one will believe you. So you have to be a little bit more demonstrative, also very much indicative of anxiety. So that felt like something that worked with the way I wanted to play the character. But at the same time, when you're playing those kinds of things, they can quickly just look like bad overacting, right? So you have to find the fine line between what is reasonable behavior and then just looks like acting 101. But beyond that, I was encouraged to make my interpretation of the character. Michael, I think, undergoes the most subtle shifts in the character perspective in the series, because I think that a lot of the atrocities that Michael commits are atrocities of passivity and enabling, so they don't look quite as different, although there are certain things that are quite different. Honestly, to me, they didn't feel at odds with each other, seeing the different versions of Christine or the different versions of Natalia. I don't know, it's just my perspective as someone who's been through a lot of therapy, and I'm an independent film producer, and I see people at their worst and at their best, and I'm just like, hey, this is all reasonable behavior that one might see from a particularly unemotionally evolved and scared group of people, for whatever reason. So I really enjoyed seeing those disparities and those differences, and just taking them in the moment and playing with them and not trying to get overly intellectual about how they all dovetail with each other. Yeah, I think casual cruelty is a really good description. I think that a character like Michael is so desperately afraid to go off of the rails. And this is something I can identify with as somebody who's dealt with my fair share of mental health issues. When you've got things roughly together, you don't want anything to change it. And you're terrified to look into the darker corners of yourself and in situations of your life for fear that they might spin you out. So when it comes time for the elliptically disastrous moments to deal with, rejecting someone in a courtroom, leaving your potential adopted daughter in this apartment, having to film her for maybe some legal proof of what you need to exonerate yourself, I found it a very reasonable decision that he would be at his most robot-like, removed, and zombie-like in order to not look anywhere close to that. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if someone like that took quite a few anti-anxiety pills in order to get through those moments, which when you see that look, it can be particularly disheartening and frightening to see a lack of emotion in a situation that is so inherently emotional. But I've seen that. I think you've got great phrases. Willful obtuseness is also really, really spot on in my opinion. And what is willful denial, right? Is it something that you're absolutely aware of and you choose? Or is it something that you're so terrified that you're actually not even willing to look at it, so you're not even quite sure what you're doing, and you're rationalizing some other choice in your brain? I think Michael might be a little bit more of the latter in the way that I played him, and I think that it takes quite a long time for Michael to open his mind up to the possibility that he may have been a large part of enabling this kind of behavior. I think what I found so fascinating about the second half of the show is that if you look at the rhythms of episodic storytelling, all the signs are pointing towards the character of Michael Barnett being the person to have a big change of heart, being able to upend the big villain and have their moment and have their huge apology and their emotional reckoning. And you don't get it in this story. I think at best, you get an incredibly unemotionally aware broken man, just seeing the first pinprick of light that he may have destroyed another human being, particularly someone who is dependent on him to take care of them. So the end of the show is really the beginning of Michael's emotionally aware journey, and I think a quite horrifying road for him to reckon with what he might have done.